5 o'clock. This is the Public Health, Welfare, and Safety Committee. We were scheduled to meet last Monday and held that in abeyance until we could see what the legislature was going to do our water issue as far as the legislation passed. And of course, you all know that failed. The purpose tonight is to listen to our esteemed county attorney and get the direction from him and any input from any of the citizens here. Where do we go from here? I'll just turn it over to our attorney.
Well, to kind of bring everybody up to speed, as you know, there's been this ongoing issue between the city providing water services to residents and or businesses in the county. And the city has been somewhat reluctant to provide those services, and we have all received those complaints from city or from county residents wanting services and not being able to get them, or if they were to get them, there were strings attached such that you have to annex or whatever the case might be. It appeared as though we were going to get an impasse, and ultimately a committee was formed between the city and the county to try to reach some sort of resolution to develop some policies that we could all live with. And then we've been working in that area, and it is obvious that we have different opinions and we have different concerns. But I will tell you, the committee has worked pretty well together. There's not been any real conflict. It's obvious that we have difference of opinions, and it may be that we end up agreeing to disagree on this issue. But where we ultimately ended up was the city came up with a proposal, and if you haven't seen it, you probably need to get a copy of it. I think we just sent it to everybody. And then we came up with a proposal. The city wants to continue to restrict the flow of water in the county. The city is opposed to any retail businesses going in the county because of the sales tax, and we were upfront about it and basically said, we don't want to lose sales tax revenue, so we would not approve any type of retail businesses out in the county. And then there would be certain limits on development and subdivision and those type issues. And then the city cites what they propose to be a water shortage for the justification, although they do acknowledge that sales tax clearly is an issue that's driving part of the policy. County, on the other hand, wants to service our residents, and we want to service we want the development out in the county because that frankly seems to be where the county and the development is occurring, is out in the county. And so, you know, its position is, city, if you didn't want to service the county, you should have never taken on those improvement districts. You should have just let those improvement districts continue to service those residents. But unfortunately, you took those residents on, and you need to service your customer base. And then we kind of encourage them to go back to the board, the water authority position that they had at one time, and that does not even seem to be an issue the city even consider looking at. So here's kind of where we ended up. We're in the middle of this process, and we have a proposal, and the city has a proposal, and I don't know where this came from, but Senator Clark came up with a bill that would basically require improved water districts and more cities that go outside their boundaries to service their customers. That's basically what that bill provided. And it did approve the extensions as long as those were paid for by somebody other than the city. And it did provide some safeguards for the cities to make sure that they had adequate infrastructure and adequate storage and adequate water. So, I mean, there were some safeguards, and in fact, when that bill kind of came to a head, Senator Clark got it out of committee rather quickly. And then we actually met with Senator Clark, went to Little Rock, met with him and other people who had other ideas about the bill, and actually came up with a very workable compromise. That bill never got out of committee on the House side, and it appears as though it's not going to come out of committee at this point in time. And that bill did seem to take care of some of the needs and concerns that we had while protecting the city at the same time. It wasn't just that. In fact, the attorney for Arkansas Central Water was there in that meeting, and he was very adamant about providing safeguards for the provider of water in that bill. And so I thought we actually came up with a very logical, reasonable bill. Again, that bill is not going to, it looks like it's not going to come out of the House side, so it probably will not be considered. And I think I even read where Senator Clark has now drawn his bill, or withdrawn the bill that he was trying to pursue. So where we're at now, we're backing around to what are we going to do? I mean, we have options, and I think the purpose for tonight's meeting is just talk about options. I mean, I'm not going to make you a recommendation per se, but I think you need to know what the options are.
What are our
And then we need to pursue and decide if we want to do anything. First option is to do nothing. I mean, that is an option. Just let this thing go like it's going, let the city do whatever it's going to do, and we will let our individual residents fight the battle with our individual residents, do whatever it is they wish to do or pursue, which is what has happened basically in the past. And ultimately, some of them win at City Hall, some of them don't. I mean, that's one option is to say that, we tried and it didn't work out. And, I don't know if that's a particularly good or effective option, but that is an option. Another option I think we have is to encourage Alan, Clark, and Ms. Rushing to pursue this legislation in 2 years and see if we can't get it pushed through. And that really does pretty much take care of our issue if that becomes legislation. But that is 2 years from now, assuming it actually will be able to be passed at that time. And that may be something we want to pursue while doing other things, but that certainly is not an option to consider is sit here and wait 2 years to do something, or do something else with understanding that that is part of the package that we would be trying to assist them in doing. Another option is to continue to try to work with the city. The city's taken a position and the city has done a proposal. The first question I have is it really a proposal or is it an ultimatum? If it's a proposal, then it's a shot out there and it's still negotiable and we can still maybe try to work something out and reach some compromise in there. If it's really an ultimatum, then we either have to take it or leave it or do something about it. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. And perhaps a meeting between Mr. Albright and myself might be in order to see kind of where the city's really at on that issue, see if we can reach some compromise. Because I will say, Brian and I have talked about this some, and he's kind of indicated to me that there is some movement available over there. So, I mean, that might be something to certainly consider. Our committee, we have Mr. Stevens here, who's chair of our committee, and Mr. Fran, who is involved in that. We have several people here who have been involved in this committee. The committee has been very effective in getting ideals out and has been very effective in having people come and speak to us, and it has been a good forum where we could at least discuss these issues that we're having issues with. Now I think the last I heard is, and I could be wrong, but I think Mr. Stevens indicated that perhaps the last meeting was the last meeting he's having for that committee, and if that means the committee's over with, then so be it, then that's no longer an option.
Well,
We can certainly ask.
Well, yeah, since he's here, would you like to comment on that, Mr. Stevens?
I said it could possibly be the last meeting that we would have. And the reason I said possibly is because I was hoping that something else might break, something might be, on the table that we could continue our discussion. And if that happens, we'll continue to meet.
Okay, so I mean, that may be that we want to continue to pursue the committee avenue to reach some sort of resolution. I think it does kind of involve whether the city's given us the ultimatum or proposal. I mean, I think that's critical. That's a key question that has to be answered. But if it is a proposal, then it means there is still room, and perhaps we can continue to work through this committee to reach some sort of resolution. Everybody, I think, agrees a resolution between the city and the county is in everybody's best interest.
Absolutely.
Everybody, I think, agrees that. Even though we disagree on some of the whys and some of the ways, I mean, that is clearly, that's the best way to do it if we can. And so that may still be an option available. And I know we recently received a document entitled Community Water Committee Frequently Asked Questions, which I think we're going to be discussing. So that would almost imply we have to have one more meeting to talk about that, if nothing else, because we have some issues with some of those, the wording in that document, and I don't think that would come out as a Community Water Committee document without another meeting, it seems to me, in which we kind of go through those issues. So, I mean, that's an option, that we need to just continue on this course and keep going. And then, of course, the other option is some sort of litigation. I mean, that is probably the nuclear option. I mean, that's the one where you throw it out there, whatever sticks, sticks. From the county's perspective, you got to remember, though, we don't have a lot of stake in what's going on out there because we've never been denied access to water. You have to have standing to initiate litigation. Now, we do, if we want to challenge the rate structure, And I think that that is something that could be challenged under Civil Rights Act dealing with equal protection. You have to treat equally situated people equally. Now, I understand there's a state statute that authorizes a tiered rate system. I understand that, but I don't know that, in fact, I do know that would not take priority over some sort of federal litigation. And you could certainly pursue in good faith a litigation involving the rate structure, because we do own county property in the county in which we are getting charged the mixed tier. So we would have standing for that. It would require other county residents, though, to initiate and or join that litigation for purposes of denial of access to water, the Walmart thing. You know, was there a Walmart thing, was there not? I don't know. I see documents that make me think there was. If they want to pursue that issue, then they would be required to pursue that issue because they allegedly were denied access to water. From where I'm standing, and Ray, you've been a lawyer hundreds of years longer than I've been a lawyer. But if there's something I'm missing, I'm sure he will point it out. But the bottom line is, you got to have standing. You got to be aggrieved to be able to pursue something. And that's one area where I think we do have standing, is if we want to challenge the rate structure. Now, we filed the lawsuit. Let's just say we do that. Then I think that does send waves, pun intended, all over the place, because they got the bonds going down. You don't need, the bondholders will not want to be in the middle of massive litigation, because if they lose that lawsuit, you're talking about a huge refund, because the county residents would be entitled to get money back. And so, it has huge ramifications if it were to be successful. And then again, I feel certain that there would be some county residents who would be more than willing to join in, that have actually been aggrieved by the issues out there. So those are kind of the issues as I see them. I'm open to any comments or any questions, or anything I left out.
No, I can talk a little bit about the history, though. Many people already know about that.
I'll make a comment. I have requested a meeting with Brian Albright,
Okay.
and it'll be a very small meeting to come to some sort of terms, and hopefully that'll happen pretty soon.
I will tell you this, Brian and I, as you guys know, we kind of got together on the jail issue, and we're able to at least come up with some proposals that both groups could deal with. And we have actually talked about the water. And he's led me with the impression that if we could just sit down, we could probably at least get close to working out something. So I don't really believe this is an ultimatum. I believe it really is a proposal. But I just think that, I do think you should instruct me to at least have one more meeting with Ron, if nothing else, and see if we can't come up with some sort of a resolution. And if we can't, so be it. But I'm the most reasonable guy in the county. So if I can't work something out, it can be worked out.
Well, what do you think it's come to this point where you've had meetings after meetings and you've talked to Brian, and now he all of a sudden thinks that you can work something, maybe work something out? Why do you think that?
Well, one, he's told me that. And two, I know that there are people on the board who really want to see this worked out. Just like there's people on this
I want to see it
board
worked out too.
that want to see this worked out. So, although there may be one or two obstacles, I think that there are people who really think it is in the county and the city's best interest to resolve this. And I think that, I'm not saying it can, but I do believe that before we initiate some sort of litigation, if we're going to go that direction, we do need to turn every stone over so that we can say, we've tried. But it's just not, I agree with you guys. The decision to not allow any type of development outside the 1 mile area, unless you happen to be right in front of a water line,
Great.
that is going to kill growth in the county, which will in turn kill growth in the city. It's, like it or not, that's where the growth's at right now.
I have to agree with what Justice Anderson is saying. I read the city's proposal, and
But I will tell you,
And I didn't see any compromise or shifting in their position whatsoever after months of sitting in a committee discussing it.
before our meetings, their position was you had to annex in to get water. They do seem to be giving up the annexation requirement, which is a movement. Now, is it a lot of movement? Is it enough movement? I don't think so. But it is some, there has been some movement. Of course, before we started, we wanted certain things too, that we didn't want those things that we wanted. But I don't know that we can come to a resolution. Sometimes you have too many cooks in the kitchen. And I'm not saying that's the case, but it can be. And I will tell you, this committee's been very active and very vocal. And I've learned a lot, just sitting there listening. Because these are smart people. We picked some good people to be on the committee. But, I have enough confidence in my ability and in Brian's ability that if we can't come up with a deal, it ain't even good. I do believe that. And I could be wrong or right, but I believe that if we can't come up with one, we're not going to come up with one. I don't think there's a need to be on it.
If the two of you were able to come up with something between you, would he then in turn be able to go to his board and get them to agree to that?
He knows what his limits are, just like I know what my limits are. There's certain things that are non-negotiable, and I know that. You guys have let me know, there are certain things we're not going to give up, and he knows that. But there are ways you can twist and spin those things to where that you can still get what you want without giving up the essentials. Frankly, there's only a few essentials that have to be preserved. There are certain things that you gotta have.
Yeah, everybody should be able to have access to water.
And that is an important, but the city has to be, the city's concerned about the lack of water, and we understand that, and we should cooperate with them in conservation, we should cooperate with them in securing additional sources. So as long as we're getting the water, of course, we will have to pay for that stuff. You would think that the city would want the biggest customer base we could possibly get to pay for that infrastructure. You would think. Yes, ma'am.
It just seems like they're cutting off their nose to spite their face, and I can see that.
Well, bad facts, bad results. And we disagree on the facts. That's part of the problem. The city's taking a position that there is a water shortage. I think our position, you guys are free to jump in any point. Our position is, yeah, if you have a 40% line loss, you probably got a problem. But it's not the water shortage, it's losing out the lines. Let's get on top of it. And the city has done a lot of stuff to get on top of that line loss. If you have no conservation in place, yeah, you can get up to the 80% of the water capacity that they have. But if you take a few reasonable steps, that shouldn't be a problem. And in 2014, there was no 80% ratio. And in the other years, it was like 10 days, 12 days. Now, 2012, I think it is the one we all talk about. But it was the 50 days or whatever.
But if they could, if their losses in 2012 were 40%, and their losses now are 20%, that gives them an extra 5 million gallons a day.
That would be true. That would be true. But now I think the position is going to be that we really weren't losing 40% in 2012. We were losing like 25%, 23 to 25, something like that. But,
Well, that's not what.
well, I understand. And, bottom line is 2012 wasn't abnormally dry year. And there was no conservation other than raising the meter rates for Franklin. Obviously, those are things that you should be doing long before you have a water crisis. Our position is the more customers, the better you offer your water. And if there is no problem, then let's make everybody conservative. Let's just don't say, okay, we're not going to let the county grow, but we'll still grow the city. Here's the bottom line. I think this is a fair statement. We want everybody to be treated alike. Forget about the county line. If you are going to supply water, supply it across the board. If you're going to reduce if you don't wanna cut back on the expansion of your water system, then say, okay, we'll give you 300 meters this year, where the first come, first served, whether you're in the city or the county. Treat everybody alike. That's what we really wanna see happen. And that seems to be a reasonable solution, but obviously the city appears to want to, because even in this deal here, it says city residents will take priority over county residents.
And they're, even once they get in the water source, they're still not gonna issue retail.
That's what that policy says.
That's what it says.
That's what it says. So I think, you know, I mean, it seems to me like that's a reasonable request, just treat, because water, they're a utility at that end. They're not really city government anymore. They're a water utility. They should treat all of their customers alike and service their customers. Nobody told them that they had to go outside their city. Had the city stayed inside the city limits, we would not be having this conversation. Red Oak would be doing their thing, Kimsey's doing his thing, North Garland County's doing his thing. They could be selling bulk water, but they didn't do that. They went outside the city limits, they should take care of their customers. That's our position anyway. I mean, that seems like a reasonable position.
Any other comments from court members?
I would just like to say that the Quorum Court has always made clear that we are pleased that the city has gone out and been proactive in obtaining water from the other core lakes. That's not an issue.
Right, it's never been an issue. And we understand that there's long-term planning, 50 years, and I think I've read some places, if they actually get the three sources, it's like 100 years into the future. Hey, I won't be here, but my granddaughter's kids might be here, so I'm good with that. That's never been the issue. The issue is, don't treat county residents like second-class citizens. Peace of life.
Is there any citizen that would like to,
Well, Mr. Justice, the only question.
How is the burden reduced on the water supply if you build a Walmart in the city of Hot Springs or outside the city?
It's not. That's where you
Then
get the
if
sales
our
tax
problem is a
regulation.
shortage, then this is not the problem. But they've came forward and said the problem is the sales tax revenue.
right,
And I think we're using the shortage problem as a crutch. Now, as the county's contentions, would we rate service as our first priority? Is that correct? Am I assuming that correctly? And rate secondly? Okay. I don't see, I haven't been able to understand how, if they condone development within the city limits, how it's any less of a drain on the city utilities than it would be if it was in the county. And I just don't see how we can follow that line. But
And that's a great point, and that's the point we've been making. If you can't build, you don't have enough water to build a Walmart on 70, whatever it is, 70 West, you shouldn't have enough water to build a Walmart on Central. And so, and I will tell you, in all fairness, they did finally step up the city and say, look, really, it's a lot about sales tax revenue too. In fact, their last deal said, we will not approve retail businesses outside the city limits, and because of the sales tax. I mean, that clearly sales tax is a driving force. Water is being used to compel a policy dealing with sales tax, and the county takes issue with it. Now, can we do anything about it? I don't know. But the rate structure, though, we can certainly at least stir it up with that.
and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. I mean, not only are they telling you if you're in the county, you can't get water unless they pick you per se to get water, but you're gonna pay more for it if you do get it. And I think that most of the areas in the county have paid for the infrastructure anyway.
All of them have, I believe. Ray's the expert on that. He's been here for hundreds of years.
Do you need a attaboy from the committee to go meet with Brian and try to settle this, or?
let's let some of the citizens make a comment before we get into that. Yes, back in the back.
Jack McGregor. It seems to me that the city has a hammer that they're hitting us over the head with. and we're in the minority position where we don't have a hammer to hit back, except for one that was just brought up, which would ruin their bond holdings. Perhaps we need to put a hammer out there that's equal to their hammer before they'll even listen to us.
Anyone else want to make a comment? Yes, sir.
Hey, Jim Pumphrey. I've been harping at the city since the first rate study came into the city from that company they hired. And I'd urge, if this gets farther, I'd urge all of you to go back and get that original one. What was it, 3, 4, 5 years ago that they did their first one? I know they just renewed it here a little while back. But my thing is, there is nothing in those studies anywhere that delineates anything of how that increased cost to the county was arrived at. It was purely arbitrary. It generates more money for them. If 60% of your customers are paying 50% more, you get more money from them. So, one suggestion, I suggest this to the city board when they did the last rate structuring. Because you have no data, start collecting that. I know the county, we have the sewer individual pumps at a lot of houses, a lot of expense taking care of that. So if you get in there and start collecting data on your trip reports, and they're a multi-million-dollar business. Their sewer and water department, right? $16, $18 million each side. So their accounting system ought to say, okay, this trip went to the county, this went to the city. The city's infrastructure is much older. Look at all the repairs and things they're doing that they have to do for the breakdown of their water and sewer lines. So, and I don't think any of us would mind paying more if it's justified. But show us the data that shows why there is a more expense to take care of the county folks.
Thank you, Jim. George?
George Briscoe. I think there's a factor that we need to consider. Judge Davis sets over the assessments and people that apply for a reduction in their assessments. There's millions of dollars at stake in taxes here that go to our school districts and other things. If we can't get water to lots in the county, a lot of them, they're not big enough for agriculture, but they're certainly suitable to build on. If we have to devalue those lots and devalue properties in the county, our revenue in the county is going to be reduced dramatically just because of the lack of water. And the subsequent outfall of that is our schools are going to hurt, the people dependent on that, because if you take a property that is a $100,000 property, if it can be developed and it turns into a much less property, let's say half that for another use, that's going to happen all over 700 and some miles of this county. And I know you sat over a lot of them last year, and we've turned a lot of them down because it hasn't been entirely demonstrated that we've had a reduction. But when this cycle comes around again, we will have had a reduction in the value of that land. The second thing is the city and their zest to annex only wants to corridor annex. They don't want to take on residences to any great degree. They want to go down the avenue, they want to pick up the revenue, and then they want to go spend it to build fire stations over on Carpenter Dam Road and other places, and their fire chief and their police chief stand up and say, we don't have the resources to provide public safety protection at this time. So how much would they take on? You know, they want to take on revenue, but they do not want to take on responsibility for residents.
Thank you, George. Anyone else like to make a comment? All right. Yes, sir.
My name is Charlie Moore. From what Judge Owen mentioned a while ago, and I think there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. This is a very complex issue, and there's a lot of facts that you can read either way. If you guys, the confidence that I think a lot of people have in Judge Owen and Brian Albright to at least bring it to the next level, to where something can be presented to both parties that if there's any negotiating that goes on, I think that's the two folks that might be able to make it happen. I would sure urge that you ask that be done sooner than later and see where that takes us. And then getting back to Judge Owen's recommendation, if that doesn't work, then you've got some other chores to deal with. But that sure would be a great next step in my humble opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Well, I see the longer this goes on in the fashion that it's going, the more detriment to the community as a whole. business community, the retirement community, the people who are considering relocating to this location. The longer this goes on, and the broader this gets rushed, because I'm seeing everywhere about how the city and the county can't get along, about anything at this point. The longer this goes on, the harder it is on this community as a whole. And the harder it will get to rein it all in and bring it back to some form of stability. I would make the motion that.
I do want to address that one issue. You know, really, in the overall scheme of things, the city and the county get along fine. We get along great with IT, we get along great with our dog catching stuff, we get along great with district court. This is one area where we definitely disagree, don't get along, have issues, and fight. But I don't think it's really fair to say the city and the county don't seem to get along. And those people, and I know it's not you're saying that, but people that are saying that are just wrong. We do get along where we agree, but this is an area where we just happen to disagree. And so, like anybody else, we either come to agreement or we move on to.
My point is I'm seeing things on Facebook and social media that, well, you try not to, but people will send you something, and you look at it, and it's like, where did that come from?
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, yeah.
And, for example, the jail,
Yeah.
the new jail, or the existing jail.
Guantanamo
Well, it's
Bay.
gonna become Guantanamo Bay. And I'm looking
I didn't see that.
and I am looking for a six-figure salary
Are
increase,
you?
yes.
Good.
There is so much junk out there that just seems to flame and flame this whole idea that there's this animosity.
Right.
That needs to get reined in.
I agree with that.
I think the fastest way to get to either yay or nay is to allow the two attorneys to meet and see what they've got on each side. And, I mean, you get to a point where you have a conclusion that you can both live with, or you agree to disagree.
Well, motion to, and, Brian, to get something done before our regularly scheduled April meeting, which would be the 20th.
Is this gonna interfere with what the judge just said about him setting up a meeting? Or would this replace that meeting?
It's gonna be the same meeting.
Same meeting.
It's gonna be a very limited bunch, which will be Ralph, one of the board members, myself, and Brian.
One of the things that has bothered me for the last 4 or 5 years is the city's obstinance in trying to do anything worthwhile toward enhancing the present system. The Department of Health that slammed the city on their first lower Hamilton inlet idea. The city came, the health department came back with 5, I believe it was, things that the city needs to do now. And this was 4 or 5 years ago. And one was doing maintenance on the 5 Lake area north of town, where the city has said they're just going to abandon them as not worthwhile and do nothing rather than enhancing and have 4 or 5 million gallon a day flow from them. They just want to leave them in disrepair and let it go. They don't want to improve the structure, filter structure, which they have done some. I think they went from what, 23,000 gallon a day to what, 24, 5?
25.
Yeah, I mean, it should be 30, 35, because the water will be there. It is there. Right now, you could do 30 million gallon with the addition of an inlet on the washed off side of the dam, which has already been engineered, proposed, and accepted by the Corps. On the east side, where the city wanted to address the issue on the west side, but the city has done nothing. I don't think the city could pronounce the word Washita for their desire for DeGray. But we could probably have 35 million gallon plus the extra water that the Corps recently has allowed us to have. You know, emergency, no. Mismanagement, yes. and the city is mute on the subject that they evidently won't even discuss. But they're great quantities of water from Ouachita that can easily be had for a minimum amount of water, a minimum amount of dollars, and perhaps a larger line to increase the flow from the filtration plant south to enhance the smaller line that's now currently serving. But you're talking probably $3 to $5 million versus boondoggle 120 million and more for what they projected. I'd like to see this addressed some, that what the health department has recommended for 5 years, the city has done nothing.
I think Ralph did a good job of explaining this. And, you know, to me, the bottom line has always been, when I moved here, I didn't say I lived in Rockwell, Arkansas. I said I lived in Hot Springs. And I've always considered it to be a community effort. I never saw myself as an outsider. And the reason we have issues is because, like Ralph said, people are being treated differently just because of which side of the city lines they live on. I think the city probably has a problem bringing business and residents inside their city limits. And intentionally or unintentionally, their course of action has been to say, well, you can't go outside the city limits, so they expect people to come inside the city limits. And I don't know how well that's going to work out, probably not very well. If you've got a company, whether it's Dollar General or Walmart or any kind of retail business, they're going to look around and see that they can make money just about anywhere outside of their already serviced area, which is the city of Hot Springs. They have pretty good coverage in those areas. And so they're going to go to Glenwood, they're going to go out where they can get Kimsey water, they're going to go somewhere else. But like I said, I've always seen it as we live in a community, and there's been agreements, there's been people who have worked together for a number of years, and we hope to see that again. We hope to see where the city can treat folks that don't necessarily live inside their boundaries the same way they treat other folks, because the idea that you have to annex for water, or that the city doesn't have to serve customers outside their city limits, because that's just unheard of in the nation, because no other city does that. Well, that ship sailed a long time ago. When they decided to service those improvement districts, they kind of waived that right. Now, it's my understanding that current city policy is that if you are contiguous to the city, that you may have to annex in order to receive those services. I don't know that that's necessarily justified, but that's their current policy.
That's what that ordinance provides. I think they have allowed some development now recently because of this problem and not compelled the annexation issue.
But I'm just hopeful that, like you said, we come to a gentleman's agreement, because things have worked pretty well as far as development goes and as far as working together goes on all these other issues. It would be nice to see that folks can be treated the same in this community.
Right. There's only, I think, one person here who's older than I am. He's also from Hot Springs, so together we probably get close to Methuselah's age, and that's Larry Stevens. Larry's an engineer that I've known for a long time, and he had the fortune or misfortune of being on the City Water Commission for a number of years, which was a commission appointed by the city fathers, I think it was the city council at that time, and they ran the water system like a business. It was business people, well-known business people in the community, and they ran it like a business. And one of the things that they made a determination on, first of all, you have to understand that Hot Springs was a poor city. Didn't even have utilities covering more than about 65 or 70% of the city itself. And people lived in these apartments downtown to a large extent. Visitors did, but it was a poor city. There wasn't much going on the outside of our city. And then the lakes got built, and people started building and developing out toward the lakes. And about the same time, this was in the 60s probably, there became federal money available for infrastructure, and people started forming improvement districts where they have some federal money in, and they pay their own taxes or assessments to build infrastructure. And this was encouraged by the Water Commission because it made rates lower in the city as well as outside the city, because you had more customers, to the point where we are today, where you've got 60% or thereabout of your residential customers outside the city limits. Now, in the classical case, Jim Fram can probably confirm that, most cities only serve utilities to their city limits. And if you are a developer and you want to develop some subdivisions right on the edge of the city, then you'll have to annex your property in, and then the infrastructure will follow. You're that way. We are not that way. We're not anything like that way. We go from almost one end of the county to the other with water and sewer for various reasons. Now, but we didn't annex very much at all during that time for the last 40, 50 years. However, annexation, even though that's a hard word for a lot of people to even hear, is not an unusual thing to happen throughout the United States. And if the city were to be able to offer services to the extent that it would be attractive to people that are immediately adjacent to the city, and convince the people within the city that it would not dilute the services that they would receive, then it would be a fairly simple sell to persuade an expansion of the city to be able to get that vote done. And at this point in time, I think the vote is just you take the total here and you take the total within the city and you add it together, and you just got to get a simple majority. But you can't do that with a harsh environment. You've got to be able to persuade people that it's to their benefit to do this. And it can be done. It just means you can't do it with a scowl on your face. You have to be able to persuade those voters who are going to be affected by that it's to the benefit of everyone to enlarge the city limits and to be able to enlarge the population by doing that. It can be done. It will take a different tack than has been tried in the past. And it will take a good educational program to be able to work. But it will work. And like I say, the A word offends a lot of folks, but it actually, it can work, and it has worked throughout the country. As long as you provide good services, you get a better insurance rate, there's lots of things you can get from that. And it would sure make Jim Fran's life a lot easier if we didn't have all this fighting going on between the city and the county with regard to water. Now, I agree with Ralph, there's a lot of areas we work together on with the city and the county. And my district is partly in the city and partly in the county. And I'm quite happy with a lot of the areas. I am very much disturbed with this water situation because I've been involved as an engineer and as an assessor and as an attorney for these improvement districts for many years. And I feel bad for a lot of those areas that are not getting the services that I believe they ought to be able to get. And really, at first it was about water. Now it's about tax dollars. And that's really what this present policy is about. I hope we can get over it. I hope we can get beyond it. And it'll take everybody working together to be able to do that.
Can I just respond in this way? I don't think anybody here has a problem with the A word as long as it's not following the F word. And that being forced. If it's not forced, and it's voluntary annexation, nobody seems to care. It's the forced annexation and using water as a friend of mine once said, using water as the bayonet to compel annexation is wrong. I think that's where we're coming from. Nobody has a problem with annexation as long as it's voluntary, really done.
The services are provided.
The services are provided.
And that's one of the places, is it usually county voters who vote down the annexation, or is it usually city voters?
No, what happens is, the way you do it is you take the city area, and then you take the area to be annexed. And you look at the total, take the total vote. So everybody in the area to be annexed could vote against it. As long as you had enough to override that vote, and it would still be, it would be an involuntary annexation, if you call it that, as opposed to a voluntary where you just come in and you sign the papers and you got it that way. But you could also have a strong group of people out here in the to-be-annexed area really wanting in. And if they don't do a very good job of selling it to the people within the city, then it could fail that way. So it just takes a majority vote of the total number of voters in the city and the area to be annexed. That's the way you do it.
I represent almost all city. I do have some county, but almost all city. And the impression that most people within my district feel by forcing annexation and bringing extra properties, particularly residential properties, into the area, that it dilutes services that they have because of the limited resources available to the city. Fire department, law enforcement, all the different types of services that are available to city residents. When you start bringing that much more into the city, it dilutes their services. So therefore, they're against this. And to answer to your question, I believe history will show that in most cases, if not all cases, where they've tried this type of annexation, it has failed because city residents did not want that annexation.
And that's true. That's why I said what I did, is it requires a good job of salesmanship after you've already shown that you can not dilute the services and be able to offer something to the people within the city as well as without the city.
And I'm not saying that it actually would happen, but perception is reality. And if the people perceive that their services will be diluted by it, that's the way they're going to go.
Do you think annexation, education would be best coming from both the city board of directors and the quorum court in order to project a unified idea?
I think the city has some limitations as far as what they can do. I think they can provide educational information, but I don't think they can lead a campaign and spend money on the campaign itself. I think that's forbidden to do.
You can't spend money on it, but you'd have to get people like the chief of police and the head of the fire department to support that publicly versus coming out saying we don't have the resources to take that on. If you have people like the chief of police coming out saying we don't have the resources, the residents are going to listen to him and say they don't have the resources, we don't want this.
And say they do annex part of the county. I mean, they're not going to annex every single area that service by water.
Yeah, they'll never annex their entire service area.
You just have to you have to look at it area at a time and make a determination. There are areas that the judge and I have talked about from time to time, where you've got to drive through city property to get to the unincorporated areas. There's
The judge and I worked with the planning commission for over a year to try and resolve this problem, and it's never resolved. We're trying to get them to annex it to eliminate the problems that mostly in Mary's district go around the lake there, where you're driving in and out of each other's property. One side of the street is county, the other side of the street is city, you know. And it hurts 911 because they have to ask what kind of garbage can you have, who to send there. It's crazy. And then they make a lot of sense.
You have a green can or can?
And I think we had a good start on that. I don't know what happened to it. It's not there anymore.
It died because
They talked about having a published annexation plan over a 10-year period so the public would know. And what happened to that, I don't know.
And it makes absolute sense, especially right around the lake area in District 4. That's exactly what happens. I happen to live right off Birchwood Bay.
saying about the different rate structures. To say, Mr. Humphrey said, that it costs more to provide water to your next door neighbor than it does to you, that's very interesting, and we would have to see the data.
There is
Yeah, we know, we talked about that.
Usually, I mean, what you do is you draw a circle 5 miles out, and you say,
5 miles
everybody
out.
within that 5 miles pays this rate. 10 miles, okay. We understand that rate structure, that makes sense. But especially in the system that we have, where in many cases, you have to pump water farther to city residents than you do to county residents. It's an interesting rate structure.
Water was the only issue we had on the table tonight.
Mr. Chairman, there's a lady in the back who had her hand raised.
Yes,
I live in the county, and I look at the performance that the city, how the city has treated Hot Springs, and I'm not impressed at all. And do I want that kind of service where I live? No. Do I want to measure my grass to see if it's 6 inches tall? No. Do I want to park something in my backyard? My mother and daddy, when the water came on Morphew Road, they refused to have it. And I thought, oh, this is terrible. I argued with them, please get water. I'm so glad they didn't hook up to the water. The issue that I see is this is Hot Springs after tax money, just flat out. And I think Jock's suggestion that we have a cudgel as big as they do, I'm all for it. That's all.
motion to adjourn.
Wait a minute. I move that we give Judge Ohm
Boy, go get him. See?
the authority to go to the city and have this discussion, have this meeting, and return back with a report of how that works.
At our April meeting.
At our next meeting, whenever that is.
I'll make a second.
There's been a motion made and a second to give Judge Jones the authority to work with the city and bring a report back to this committee at its regular April meeting on the 20th. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Is there anything else? Yes.
This is not on the agenda, but as most of you probably heard, there is a situation in Hot Springs where a family has been, children have been taken away from their parents. That happened back in January the 12th. 11 children were removed from a home. It's now almost 3 months later, and no charges were ever brought against the family, but the family is still apart. The governor and the lieutenant governor have shown an interest in trying to review some of the systemic problems within the DHS system. And what I would like to suggest, without trying to address specific cases, which are already in the laws, the legal system, since this has become an international spectacle, I've received a lot of comments from people who live in Garland County who've had similar type situations with DHS systemic type problems. What I would like to suggest or recommend is that we have an open forum to allow citizens to come and address systemic issues, problems that they see within the system, where we can then draft a letter to the governor and the lieutenant governor and say, these are some of the issues we would like your teams to investigate, because they have asked for this information, and it would at least give them some direction as to what areas to look at to try to deal with the issues within the system that they're trying
very sympathetic to the different cases that are going on, and I recognize the systemic issues going on at DHS. I don't necessarily know that this would be the proper place for that kind of hearing.
It's clearly not within our jurisdiction to tell DHS what to do, what not to do. That is a state issue, and I think you should certainly offer this courtroom, offer facilities, offer to help if DHS wants to send somebody down to do the investigation, or to do the public meeting. But that does go way beyond the scope of this committee's.
Well, that's why I was saying, I'm not looking at specific cases, I'm just looking at, experiences that our citizens have had, and then send that information to the governor's office,
I'm afraid
or lieutenant governor's
you're
office.
gonna have a lot of unverified information.
Well, if you have the same meeting about the state police, you'll get the same type of response. If you have the same meeting about any governmental agency, you're gonna have people who are disappointed with the way they were treated. I commend you for wanting to have a forum available for people to express their concerns. And I still think you can do that. I just don't think it needs to be a quorum court meeting. It could be a very wonderful meeting, and you can use this room.
Let me ask this question. Where can we, who should we send people to, that come to us?
Well, if it's a criminal matter, we send them to the sheriff's
Well-
office. If you don't believe it's a criminal matter, then you can send them to Little Rock, to DHS, and with the governor apparently is gonna have you've indicated that perhaps they're gonna do an investigation themselves.
Governor,
The Attorney General's office is a good place to send them to.
Send them to.
The Attorney General's office does those type of things. And if you wanna have a meeting, then I think you can do that. I just don't think it's a quorum court issue.
My concern is trying to overload the governor's office with phone calls of
Send them to the
unverifiable
AG's
stuff. And
AG's office.
AG's
just
part, that's what
constantly,
they do.
you know, because obviously, people are gonna complain if they feel that, if things didn't go their way. I understand that. That's why I don't wanna get involved in specific cases. And I'm looking at procedural processes that we might want
I think it will turn into everyone's.
When we did the dog stuff, you guys
Yes,
will
that
recall,
was the first thing.
everybody that had a dog that barked was here to complain about their specific dog problem. And I think that's what you're gonna see. But if you get those calls, you should send them to the AG, because the AG is supposed to investigate those complaints.
That's fine,
Oh, God.
that's fine.
We are sympathetic.
Absolutely.
Motion to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
We've got